아침 지대 치매 안에 지금 당한 주기지마 됩니다봐 지원미다봐고 쉬사는데 제가 지원미다봐스기디 남싱에메레 지상가도 기티나 이미 치료브레스 진에 언도 쉬로 제가 치료베는다 네 가지기리라는 매와 책이라서 매와 책이 말해서 아니 매와 맞춰봐서 아니 치마 개와치마 링고브레스 개와치마 링고베나 아니 간슬링기리라나 안델이야 개와치마 레세딜에 조화를 맞으면 니요레스 디네자 등하주기다 지딘 치마 교수 조원이기 엔디도 삼수시바스 제가 디디고 마셔야 되는.
So good evening. We had looked for a while first at this precious human rebirth that we achieved, and then came to recognize that whilst we have this rebirth, it is not going to last. Our death is inevitable, but the time of our death is uncertain. And when our death comes, we will not only leave behind all our possessions and our loved ones, but this body too. But our consciousness, our continuum, will continue on into a new birth, arising in a new body. So we've now come to look at the potential subsequent rebirths that possibly await all of us.
안디네 자다네 조원 개와치만 조스케스 개와린세텔라 아니 니데 가르세네 아니 마주 안드레스데 덴드로스야치레스 지상 안드로스 덴드로 개바이나 아주 다데 아주 덴딜레 덴드로와 덴드로 개바이나 아주게 아니 디게 마와 아니 지게 강아 유베나 강아세 탑을 망아 유바 강아 융아 아니 지게 냠렌지야기 아니 고합이야 보여바디 아니 덴드로기 덴데 차고래 당한르 때는 개발림바이나 당한르 때들이야 아니 지게 이제야 아니 지 동아 빠도면 동아 마와 아니 주주제기 동아 망보에다 대기 뇨아 여기 매로 대기 매바제 뇨아제 안데라 지 주제기 냠는 고합기니 매지게 차고래제 지사당 한르 때들이 지사당 한르 게디 가르스키 오래세네 데 규단 끼 매발에 끼고 말치던 규단 끼를 때는 끼고 규단 끼인데 그래서 만족에 규디 아주 디퍼레스 지사 디퍼사바 있나 디기 끼인제데 마 아니 녀몽바게 녀몽몽비 디퍼세 디빌레사 되네 만족을 끼고 그래 안 덴들 끼야 되양 규단 끼를 때는 끼고 그래 지사디 간스키 그러시네 덴들 끼야디 게빌레사 게워주 게빌레사 안델레 델라드네 덴들 끼고 그래 지사다 만족이야 난들기에 된 덴들기와를 소소라를 라와가요 말에 세상 소수기 윤주 가르사베네 레 야고사베네 덴들기리에 유야고사메는 난들기리에서 세상 레가나게 근데 지다를 방만한 신진도신 개월에서 그게 디고시로.
When our inevitable death comes, our consciousness will continue in one of two directions, either remaining in the high realms as we are now, or falling into the lower realms. If we remain in the high realms, there are various manifestations or expressions of high realms, which are differentiated by greater degrees of happiness or proportionately less manifest suffering. Or if one falls to the lower realms, there, the suffering is incomparable to what we have experienced in this life. And not only is the suffering in the lower realms so much more intense than we have now, the lower realms are also characterized by a situation of helplessness, of powerlessness, in that we are in the lower realms, one is unable to spiritually develop, one is unable to accumulate virtue in the way that we can now. So this therefore leads us to think, what leads to which either of these rebirths? And we recognize that a rebirth in the higher realms comes about solely in dependence on virtuous karma that we've accumulated, but rebirth in the suffering lower realms comes about solely in dependence on non-virtuous karma that we've accumulated. This then leads us to recognize that we cannot choose our next place of rebirth. It is not something that is under our own choice. Rather, the karma that we have created, that dictates where our next rebirth will be.
제사당 아주 미자 아주 그 세디 땅을 두시 미게 제게 강기도 가려면데 아주 망고지 냠녀지 망고사도 아주 모습도 통되게 책으로와 제상 아주 밀리게베이나 지자 밀리아 강아 예배 강아 예배이네 제 강아 세계 탑럼하고 여봐 로봇에게 여봐 은지게 되네게 강아 세비게 내 나서시베네 면주제 자투야다 안지 양지 나서 슈침부지 면주제 샤슈제는 내서 자투야 나 강버디게 타라면 샤슈제야 등부수야 안지 파수 타 조회네 니 취셔레드네 조고조고레 투야 안수지게 소소게 신가로 돈도 매वे나 소설 아직도 답심 되는 안샤나즈는 좀 지금 텔라 돈도 매바도 lum바샤난 수어지 레케지네 야갑샤는 수케진 되네 튕겐 두야 되네기 디기 두야 되 지금도 통치소 교바 지게 아주 밀이야 되네기 디기 두야다 강한 세계 탑로 망고 시여바든 안쪽에 예대로 와 되잖아 미기 아니 지게 되네기 디기 롱주거로 와다 아주 밀래 안디나네게 미네다 디나이나 직초에 냠는 제약이 지네 아 수술하게 잠이지 냠는 제 되네기 제람 냠는 제 똑같고 토바네 안디레냐 안 디기 야가주야다 안시안라에 판바게 쳐버도 라라야네 디기 주투여가 되가 저기 밀 되네 여바데 가서 갈간삼로 지나서 하고 두고로 봐 나딜레 다 라유리야지선 아니 가지고 당아서 통고마디네데 라유리야 수수 메시아다 디술야 게베나 단 류기 나자다 사야도야 강하다 되네 그 가야 용고 말와 되네 and the counter says that you are medicine and Devajan said some time give in the Diwasi some Gawajan Yama the Tivusak, you know, much then Chasan digit by Chajan and now you Dendulikina and Dennis you are a sagic and Nisuruji, Dennis Chagor.
So this rebirth, we are amongst the beings of the higher realms, having been born as a human, and the higher realms are classified as rebirths of humans and of gods. And as humans, we know that whilst we are in the higher realms, it's not that we are free of problems, suffering and difficulty. We have so much experience of the pains and miseries that humans do experience. But this is still classified as a higher realm, not only because proportionately is the suffering much less than is experienced in the lower realms, but because of our remarkable human intelligence, as well as our capacity to cooperate with each other, we have so many techniques or methods at our disposal to help mitigate life's challenges. So we help each other, both strangers as well as people that we know. We learn from each other. We benefit from the group technological developments, such as medicine and so forth. So in these and many ways, we have a wide variety of techniques to help deal with the problems and difficulties that humans experience. And what is also of such great importance for human beings is we have the capacity with this intelligence to understand the Dharma and to develop it within our own minds, which means we can develop remarkable qualities such as genuine love, genuine compassion. And in this way, we have the capacity to radically transform the future trajectory of our lives through the virtue that we accumulate through our spiritual development. Also, in the high realms, there are the various expressions of the God realms, whether in the desire realm or the form realm or the formless realm. And these are marked by incredible happiness, a happiness that humans can hardly imagine, and far fewer problems. And in some of these realms, the problems are so minor as to be unobservable from our perspective. But in particular, in these realms, the pleasures, the happiness is great.
다는 간도를 깨버네 가려래 시대다 간도 써야 되라 간주기 가소리 냐와 이다 둔로 숨세 대산을 숨치고래 제사 둔 간주기 밀리치나 둔로리아 강아 채와 디기 뇨와 아니 이다시나 둔로리 길이야 되스 디기 마와 네 강아 충화 채고래 다 둔로리 되스 강아 채와 디다 이다디 채고래 강아 채 Dile kanga che de da nyawa pase de ka nyawa pase che gore jiza nyawa ida dundro sum chingado jiza da mandu dendul ma ke bana yanan dundro le ke gore yanan nyawa le ke gore yanan ida le ke di sum mo de ke se yo ma le che da de le ke bana kanga khar yo re se da di ne ta di ga zo xin gu gore di bena nganzu mili ke na da nganzu ki mi ne thang gal ga sam ching ga ha gu gore ba di na xin do sum ta na la le ne da de ne de rob chi ba chi shu ro da di na ha gu ba da nga nga so le ke ba ne thang nga du ru le ke ne thang ka ne yo re nya wa le ke ba ne thang ka ne yo re i da le ke ba ne thang ka ne yo se di ne da de ha gu ba na ge chen bu yu cha go re di ha gu ba ne ga le yo ke ba yo se na da nga na zu ya ga wa ro ma ro nga zu le dam ga yo de ro dam ga yo re che sa di ngan ro le de ne ka nga de la ma ro ye tab lam de nga zu da de be chi na be chi tang tu ye gi 강아지 세투에 될 조모가 탑람 제투에 가서 다들 뉴바 여바래. 제가 뉴바 여바자디 니서 하고 어디 계침모래. 디네서 디네스 딩안드 만드게 강아니에서 하모거나 만드게 유가르시 기가 디하고 거 말해. 유하모거나 디 유디 매바서에게 탑방당이 탑람지 세타데 하고 거 말해. 디네서다 제 안드게 동안 디네스디 하고 거에 대한 저 계침을 주차고 해저래. 디네서다 된마 당안드게 동아디가 ngandwe ba na ngandwe dunga kane kade yor kanga dine yor kade yor se pa mo tu chine da shim jo sia de do chine shu ya de.
That's just a very brief overview of the situation in the higher realms. And this is something later in the text we'll come to look at in some detail. The other direction one can take at death is into the lower realms. So this we're going to look at in some detail from tonight. And so the lower realms have three broad divisions. The lower realms of the rebirth as an animal, as a spirit or as a preter, or in the hell realms. And these are differentiated in differing ways, but in particular in the animal realms, the suffering is much more intense than humans experience, but far less than those of the preters. But the preters, whilst their suffering is great, it is it's comparably little compared to the intense suffering that beings who are born in hell experience. So in this life, we have some experience of the sufferings of the human realm, both what we have experienced directly and what we perceive. But it's important to come to understand the sufferings of the unseen realms, and in particular here, the lower realms, because by coming to gain a good understanding of what it would be like to be reborn there, one can develop the stable determination not to create the causes that will inevitably lead to rebirth in the lower realms. So there is great purpose in this presentation on coming to understand the suffering that beings are experiencing right now in those lower realms.
Nyawa nima jikshin chen, chegom dagi riba yi, ida dagyan chenpar cha, mungpe dunga rab mangwe, jo song dashin chenpar cha, degyu namban degyu che, topka zemling mi lu, detop duso nga song gyu, rabdu jimde chepar cha asi song su osa.
So we turn to the text where we concluded last week. So in the handout, we're at the very top of page 103. In the published book, at the bottom of page 89. Contemplate the suffering. So there's a sub-outline here that we don't have it in the translation. The need to think about suffering. So here Lama Tsongkhapa presents the need or the reasons for thinking about suffering. Contemplating the suffering of the lower rebirths, and ask yourself, what will become of me if I'm reborn in the lower rebirths? Nagarjuna said, every day recollect the hells which are fiercely hot and bitterly cold. Remember too the hungry ghosts emaciated by hunger and thirst. Observe the animals and recollect the numerous sufferings of confusion. Relinquish their causes. Engage in causes of happiness. Once you have gained what is hard to gain, a human body in this world, endeavor to cut the cause of lower rebirths.
Kewa chilim, kewa chimach, kewa lengo ures, yana dendrol kewa lengo, yana ngandrol kewa lengo ures, chik songwa za, detar na, sim dinigi le ka na wange, da dinigi kewa chimaji lengo ugina, da ngason de kena, da jirashi du gyuru nyam na, chizan da sosong dinigi da kewa ugina, da ngason de kewa ina, ane kanis yang ungure sempe dusina samtang kure so, da ngason de kena, da jirashi du gyuru nyam dos.
So, just linking to what we have just looked at, when our inevitable death comes, our consciousness does not cease to exist, but will continue. It will continue in one of two directions. It can only either remain in the high realms or fall to the low realms. So here we are being guided, as Lama Tsongkhapa writes. Contemplate the suffering of the lower rebirths and ask yourself, what will become of me if I'm reborn in the lower rebirths? So this then leads us to contemplate what are the sufferings of the lower realms.
Pedro Jona Ganga Mewachi, Ganga Sia Tablam, Bedelia Dumada, Ganga, Danyora, so the Benian as a Mambu, and the such as Soba, and the Chikuma Mambu, Benora, Ganga Mangu, Yorelamna, and tell the Drew Mess if you got touched the dance Yorba. Chisadi, on the day to war, but dance our drove in him. Chini Pass Camden. Sajile Camdrovina at the Sajilia, Sawanam Chicken, Yore, Deli, Pejutaya, Karakaru, Saya, Karaku, Care, or Sazan, some religion can do over there. Then some mother is George and the Penil, dinner draw was some guy, mother to talk to your in the dinner. Same, Chume, the Gangate, the dinner go, which is that Niel Nanzukarina, and Yakara Chevin, and Yel some Tango, but also to the Songa Joe and Yel Madonia, or Danga Songa di Joe, Dino, Chazan Sumner Jingo, Chizan, two Shinans, Yakachevina, Champion Drovina, or Delia, Champion Delia, and Chichi Divorce, some Tangorwa, Chizadi Tang, and Gidin, and the Chidan Chitin, Ranzuki, Chitin, Chisolia, Yakachevina, Kahodrovina, Nelia, some shit down to reach Cheche, didn't hold water. On Pedina, she, as a machine Yelia. Kewa chima drosa tilea, samish down, and the canisto wood, Josa Kahoyoric, the nigger go, Del Kena Ganga Kari, Diga, Ganga Karkariores, the Ganga Kani, Denis Yovin, tell him and Mayoya get Tablam Kariore said, or that Tablam di over the Hawan, or Tablam Bija, Chema de la Ganga di Yomo, or Jed, Yechimo Chagoro. Chizan Dineza do some down who raise a Kewa Chimagi, not Nasolitona, and the Karchiries. Then answer given and answer given and do Dunga Young Wars, and do Dunga Karkari, Kanakari or such, or do some down Wars.
What Lama Tsongkhapa is encouraging us to do is something that we actually do in our own life. For example, if one is considering to move, first one will have this consideration to move for a reason. There'll be some reason compelling you to think about moving to a new destination. Here, in this context, the reason is that death is coming, and then we will have to take rebirth somewhere new. But in our own lived experience, if we are considering moving somewhere, we will always take time and care to investigate potential destinations. We will try to avoid moving blind somewhere, but we will want to know what to expect. We will certainly want to weigh up various options to decide where is more desirable, where to avoid. So we will investigate, and where we see a place is marked by hardship or deceit or violence, we'll do our best to avoid such a place. And if we settle on somewhere that seems much more appealing, we'll nevertheless investigate what to expect, perhaps what kind of environment it will be, what kind of weather to expect, and then we will look at what we need to purchase and how we should prepare, and then do so. So this is what we would do in our own life. So taking that way of thinking, here we need to investigate the potential future rebirths to ensure and from that come to see how we should prepare to have to avoid harmful situations, but rather to have better situations.
nyawa nima jishin jen se de chezadang anzugi nyawa ngasol kebana nyawa ni cheke nyawa chinye da janye se de denegi nyawi nyawa gesechi yu den shiore chezan denegi janye nyawa denegi nyawi ge de 강아 갈가요 삼다제 되는 바 두신 셈이야 전국으로 강아 되는 여바지 전국으로 양내 양도 전가지고 전바지고 하고 보시게 돼서 냐와 인지 님의 지신제 살직 제 삼다지 샤샤베는 지금 셈랭에 봐 야고 기투고만 양내 양도 양나 멍부 삼다고도 오다 될때 드라기님의 타고도 셈비 삼로디 밀리고래제 제가 님의 네, 냐와 님의 직신 제스 님의 직나시 이제 야네야도 제가만 살직 제제 샤샤도 핑 말해서.
To give a broad overview of the situation in the lower realms, Lama Tsongkhapa quotes from Nagarjuna. So looking at the first two lines, every day recollect the hells, which are fiercely hot and bitterly cold. So here, Nagarjuna is guiding us at the outset that this is a reflection that one should not just engage in sporadically, not merely hear a presentation and leave it at that, but one needs to take this to heart. And to take it to heart, one needs to engage in regular, repeated reflection.
점는나라 개합나래 개가지 배 튕기 약고 사시 쌍마 따도 약고 개가 가실이야 아니 교부 따도 군부 아니 개가 가실 배 강아 망보 마다 되네기 내나 뭐 강고 똑시 태야다 이 망고 줘도 개가 가가 여러 어디 나시 냐와 될라야 냐와도 동아 체쇼 동아 배 가실 동아 슈체보 윤링보 용어 가실 때도 중화 용화 용어 지나디 나지 다디 독쇼데 냐와 rabtu tsashin zhangwa yi se de zhe nyawa tsanye se de ye duksho de ganga chisho yuwen chida dine nyawa zhangnya se de desu ganga chisho yuwen chago re che chizan dine ki nyawa tsanye da zhangye ki dunga de ki samda dine yunggo dine ganga dine yorwa samda je oda dine ki samdang go re si de yane yado samda ne dine jikni sam yansi tan o da dele 타오마단데 탑미네 델 기네덱 백가스 어머번에 델 마케바데 드링지 탑시 지긴 선배 삼로디 리고르와 디네자 어디 잡도 사실 장마이 녀와 님의 지시대에서 뒤송거래.
So we should approach this with a similar understanding that just like in our own world, whilst it is a single realm, the human realm, there are many different countries. And in these different countries, the situations can differ quite vastly. So in some countries, their rights are respected, there's the rule of law and so forth. But in others, this is not the case. Those people who live there are subjected to control or even abuse by the state or those such as warlords who have power. Other countries are in a state of war. So there's tremendous divergence in the lived experience of humans in dependence on the country they happen to be in. So similarly, within the lower realms, there are different divisions there as well, where the lived experience can differ greatly. So And Nagarjuna starts with presenting the situation in brief of the hell realms, the situation where for those beings living there, the suffering is the most intense and unbearable and inescapable. So we see this in, for us, the second line, the hell realms which are fiercely hot and bitterly cold. And so the purpose of hearing this presentation, and as we see in the first line, of reflecting on this every day, is to develop this determination. This is not what I want to experience, and I will do everything I can to ensure I do not accumulate the causes that will lead to rebirth in such a place.
nyunga di da ida chagore jesa dini gi ta disugore da dini ki sadi ji de nyawa di ma che da de dini ji le de nyawa ma ji jena ka wa ji se jese dunro ka se ida se chi ngore se de dini esa da ida ki na di dun kanga di ge samdang ngore se de teogum da ge riba yi ida da yang tembar cha se de adu chine jesa ida se de ke ba ne kanga kharsan pa chi ma che teogum yi dunga 지다 강가 먹고 요 있는데 제 사야동에 매바다 근데 동야 매바 갖고 배동하다 사야동에 저것도 배동하 제고 미동하 된서 제고 되네 제가 공배동하 되네 리바스 수부배 교부 되네 감보 칼라사야 매바자 수부 감보 교부시 된서 리바이 되네기 이다 동하 된서 용거래 제가 돼서 이다 다 템바자 이다 개변 동하 되네 요래서 두신 제비오 동하 고 사야마르 동하 chudaya mabe dunga denegi dusene kanga yores be kanga de dusen jengo gore idala ke bana kanga de net yores jengo gore yesere.
The three broad lower realms, the situation in the hells, the suffering there is the most intense, unbearable, and inescapable. Where the suffering is far less than that is in the preta realm or the hungry ghosts, but there still the suffering is intense. So we have the text, the verse continues. Remember too the hungry ghosts emaciated by hunger and thirst. So for the pretas or the hungry goats, their primary sufferings are intense hunger and thirst. It's an intensity of hunger and thirst that we have almost certainly never experienced in this life. And they also have additional sufferings beyond that, but these are the most pronounced. So this is again, something we should call to mind, that there are beings suffering in this way, and that they are in such a situation because of karma created. And we take that as inspiration to guard the karma we create.
that dele tos tunga nyua de da dunro de gere da dele tunga nyua da tos diki ma yu ida da desole chine diki tos ma yu de tunga tos nyua de ge ada tunga ida ka se dunro ge samtana ka se worse da dunro se de shera samta rigo namju shera yo ma le se le chisa ji 남주 시라에 메디 엔디제네 디하고 디제네하고 그래서 즉 강한 세계 탑람 디기 강한에도 강한 세계 탑람 시달리 두고 남주 메바래 그래서 류기 차네 야래 아니서 거기서 남섬주 삼다에 남제베 제시라 메바래 제자디네자 모비 둥을 라마위에서 제자 조선 대신 템퍼처스 제자 조선 dunro세 될이야 몽신 몽바 디무 되니기 둥아 한지 두신 소디시네 dunga mo yung go res jesa deni ge dunga ta dunu ge dunga de ge pa dusina sam ta che oda otika nga dele oda dunga le ke ngan dunga ka sang dunro le ke ba kanga deni tin duwa desa ta deni ki dele ta ta go do ta di ma ge da tablam da den je go sa be ge samlo nga ju tapshi ta ra go ba za yo ba inza ani nga ju dunga nga so ge ka sa dunro ge dunga de pa dusina sam dang je ba che ne an sam dang go res.
Then thirdly, the text continues, observe the animals and recollect their numerous sufferings of confusion. So of the three lower realms, the suffering is least intense for animals, and they do have some capacity for happiness. But the main problem that animals experience is translated here as confusion. The meaning is that they are dull, they are really stupid. in the sense, with the meaning that they are confused about what to do about their situation. They lack the intellectual capacity to deal with their situation, to improve their situation. So they have such limited intelligence. This then leads to them suffering so. So here too, we reflect on the situation of beings there, so as to develop the determination that I will not accumulate the causes that may lead to such a rebirth.
가와드 가샤 간스 디네 간스 트여고서 베디 삼다시고 막 떼슈게 태안에 되네 강바데 파 마샤 나 둘둘다만 메라 삼다 미네 람사 마테데 람사 팅이 말어 가르치나 거기 제시하면 람사 제베 삼다제 어디디 담보디치 어디지오 삼베 삼다 쩨네 마 쩨네 타투구로와 제가 딘도 베네 갱고로다 오르신 디네시네 람사 콜직 람사디와 강바데 짜게 포투숨 람사 슈게 태안에 마도 아니 지가기 제샤 간스 파 텔레 타고 스베 삼다 메르와 베네 베로스 데네로와 밀리는 네 삼다 예드로 아디 가리다 메뉴 주에 가리 주샤 가하는 주고 스베 삼다 제바진 남사디 제야죠 소소 제두면은 미샤다 게다데 로제 쇼스 제야죠 바다.
To give an example, let's say one of the kangaroos around here jumps over a fence but doesn't quite get it right and ends up getting tangled up in the fence. Our kangaroo then is rather limited in what it can do. If it's now caught up in this fence, it can struggle, but that's just going to make its pain more intense, may well rip its skin. But other than trying to forcefully free itself, it doesn't have much it can do, for the simple reason that this animal just lacks the intelligence to solve what really is for us, quite a simple problem. If we were to be caught in a fence, we would have options. We could relax our mind, look at the situation, and come up with a solution. If we couldn't, we could call out for help. And for a kangaroo, they may be surrounded by those who have some care for them the rest of their life. But what can they do other than look on helplessly? Whereas fellow humans could easily help us from something small like that. And also, even if those other people were strangers to us, they could help us. This is not the situation for an animal such as a kangaroo, who may even be preyed on in such a situation. So this shows the difficulty for animals, that they just are so stupid.
대규 남방 대규제에서도 대규 남방에서도 지나대지 냐와이 냐위 강아디게 삼다 강녀와 제반에 데네데네 강아디네 요래서 다 이다를 제반에 데네데 조금 유동아 데네데 요래서 동아선 삼다 다 눈으로 깨나 모시 아직 몽베 마리 몽그스 몽베 데네 몽베 남주의 배시 담을 데네 강아 동아 데네 요래서 다 데네게 가제 냐위 동아 이다이 동아 데네 dunro le kya dunga dine duwa sembe dunga samda de ta dunga desul anda dunga dine yonggu na dela ma kye bage thablam garre yesne desul garche yonggu resne di yu ngan diwa sabal ni ki gores chesa diwa sabal ni ki gor chesa di yu di ngan su dada yu di ma ngan su ngan so kye gi dine gi yu di pa pang sha ba ina yu sa ba ma sa ba nye ma ngan su sa sha ba ne di pa pang ba ina dine ma ki ma re so re di yu pang sete chesang ngansong nyawa da ida dunjugi dunga dige samta dele yege demame ba odanga dele de ganga chesa diki me sambe sambaina sosora kachen diki yu pang go re se di yu nam pang sete.
So that in very brief is an overview of some of the sufferings in these lower realms. And this, as we see at the top, is something that Nagarjuna is advising us to reflect on every day. Reflect on the intense suffering from heat and cold in the hells, the intense suffering from hunger and thirst as a preta, or the suffering that comes from the stupidity of animals, and reflect on this again and again to the point where an emotional response arises within you that leads to, we see here, leads to wanting to relinquish their causes, engage in the causes of happiness. So in other words, engaging in this reflection until an emotional response arises, leading to an apprehension to engaging in the non-virtue that will lead otherwise to such a rebirth. And this is this reflection then needs to be engaged in repeatedly again and again until this apprehension to engaging in non-virtue arises in a way that is stable. In this reflection on the sufferings of the lower realms, the goal of the meditation is twofold. Firstly, as we see in the third line in the second verse, that this apprehension to engaging in non-virtue needs to arise, and we need to regenerate it so that apprehension is stable. So it almost becomes visceral, that one does not want to engage in anything non-virtuous. Then the second part of the reflection is what we see in the fourth line. So here, as one has a strong aversion arising to the potential rebirth of the lower realms and thereby towards the causes that will lead to such a rebirth, one also comes to see more clearly the advantages of this rebirth. And as we saw in a previous chapter on the precious human rebirth, this rebirth we tend to take for granted. We see it as commonplace or ordinary when one looks at the rebirths across the realms of samsara. We actually see just how special it is. So by looking at the sufferings of the lower realms, not only do we develop an aversion to being reborn there and therefore to the causes that will lead to such a rebirth, but a valuing of what we have achieved grows, and a determination to accumulate similar causes that will lead to further rebirths. This arises within one.
Anda deniki ngandro yu paya da ane dendro ke yudi tupo gore si gore ane gedi che gore silabna that ba dikina that che gore so topka zemli milu detop duso ngandro yu rabdo timde separcha side topka zemli milu detop duso side chesada dada ngana zole kariyorsne ne topka wi 단주기 밀리지 못해야 돼. 다와게던 주어 주세비 리딩 아주 다들 점물링 밀리지 못이 톱되어 해서 톱가 근데 다와게 주어 주세비 리딩 점물링 밀리딩 배톱 깔려하고 녀하고 시우디 다들 아주 톱되어 해서 제가 디 대톱 뒤스 다들 아주 톱에 뒤 텔려야 마술이다다 마술 마게기 유바야게 제베네 제투이 니바 찾아 예바 네 깨와치마 난 된절게 되니기 denduki dinyayagi ludendele dupyagi gyuchasang duptuyagi ten kohab yapu de dade de dusu de redo yores jesa dade dusu je khores or jesa topga zemli milu de top du se de jesa de top dusu da ngasong gyu se de ngasong ge gyudi pa pang khores pa pang de rabdo timde jebar ja se de da denduki gi gyu gewat be simju je be ju je 직두시네 rabdu tim ribu tim be sapsap cheche an nyamlen che besu che gore tade gohop tadidire so 당아서 tade toptiwi lyuden milurun boche dawaki da jowa jusa toptiwi ndite ngaso gu ka paya ta tenroke gyutuya de tadidire gohop dire dikos tu gore so da
So this meditation thus far has presented 2 points, and we're about to come to the third. So the first was this aversion to potentially falling to the lower realms and thereby developing this aversion towards accumulating non-virtue. And then secondly, valuing this precious human rebirth that we've achieved evermore, and this determination to engage in the causes of happiness. And now further, now the final part of this, the final verse, one comes to strengthen the meditation that we have just concluded on the impermanence of this life, which had those 3 decisions. And this is reflected here in the final verse. Once you've gained what is hard to gain, a human body in this world, endeavor to cut the cause of lower rebirths. So this commitment that we've made based on the prior topic of meditation, that I must engage in the Dharma, I must do so from now, and I have to only engage in the Dharma. This then that determination becomes even more stable within oneself. And one in particular strives to cut any accumulation of non-virtue, utilizing thereby this life in a meaningful way. And then just to say this word endeavor, this is okay, but the Tibetan really is quite strong here. It's like fully concentrate is more literal, which shows that the mind is completely focused on closing the potential of accumulating causes for the rebirth in the lower realms.
다 방당 가르스 방고래란 다데데 돌두시 다디나데 송르와다 세상 돈달라 네 대등하선 규세디 아주 레다 레다 녀모발레네 기워디야 녀모바소 녀모바디 기고래시 세상에 신주주나래야 송소 녀모바세디 아주 근데 아주 체데래 마기버스게 개와치만 아솔 마티 둥아 녀주지 녀모바디 지고래 진짜 녀모바디 자원원데 제가 녀모바디레스 제가 녀모바디 방고래스 메바소고래 사실 제가 디 다데디 지바차로와 안내 아주다 안줄레 디기 두에게 교원도 고바토에 규디 아주 예제도 추림소야다 진바다야다 안쇠반냠네 제야다 근데 잠니죠 고미야 장슈쌤 고미야 대소 아주 디기 두에 유레스 디 배시 다 규제세 다데 균냠네 제월세도 대소 So
these verses from Nagarjuna just give a very brief overview of what is experienced in the lower realms. But what it points to is not just what is experienced in the lower realms, but the conclusion or the purpose of this meditation, which is to get us to be ever more determined to utilize this precious human rebirth well, to accumulate the causes for excellent rebirths in the higher realms. And this is also something that is being emphasized in our Wednesday night teachings on Shantideva's engaging in the Bodhisattva's way of life, because there currently the focus has been on taking control of our mind and ensuring our mind doesn't come under the influence of the afflictions. Because when the mind is under the influence of the afflictions, we create the causes for suffering. So here we see that one develops the determination to cut the cause of lower rebirths. So one would normally say that is negative karma, non-virtuous karma, which is correct. But non-virtuous karma is accumulated by the afflictions. So therefore, this ties very closely with those who come to or who are following the Wednesday teachings as well. Those meditations on being mindful of one's mental process and thereby being aware of when the mind is afflicted and ensuring that one doesn't follow those afflictions. Thereby, one ceases to accumulate non-virtuous karma. And then what is stated here in the verse above, engage in causes of happiness. So one must not only turn away from non-virtue, but the skillful way to turn away from non-virtue is to engage in virtue. In other words, to strengthen one's wholesome minds ethical restraint, generosity, patience, love, compassion, and so forth. These wholesome minds, which are the causes of happiness, the causes of rebirth in the high realms, and the our ongoing spiritual development.
the deeper side thing and something that they shall sagu but that to do some time some gonna stand or and that's so sugi deeper chishaba you get and jambache madam by nada how that yamanda ko to me but the deeper mong sa yores then also you saw yores and be sometimes that is be team do dang it during and ya sanji give your conscious me ya ning taban it is ma shagi sambigida dusine deso notu chungsha danga ngason ke yusa gyo di notu chungsha di ba notu chungsha ji mindu sambe samta je da diring e di ba di ba shagi dir konjo yuden ya gemne konjo su midun ya shagi se bedar rang yuden ya gemne konjo su mo ye se be me ba che sangi mo so hyu se be me ba che che an di dun ya ngi shagi sambe samta du se sam dang bo ji mindu che sa di notu chungsha sambe samta de za dang e di ba diring ya Nyokonjudule shagi sembe da shagi sembe get samashna. Odu samdanda mo bana chinje능이 다시한리 뇌비 디빌을 싸워 있는 지금 매 sembe domsum du sam다이래. 디 sam다서다 데디 디포샤에게 다시 하긴 sembe 다시 하기 돈다래야 안 소수게 나 베네 쳐봐 만제 부 쳐봐 제나 개와서 사베나데 안디 멤비게다 지금 매니저야다 나다야다 and Judu Chene, and Lamrim Sodiptoya, no go sign your Sodipto Makarake or Jubina, and the Meme Antic, Sosuke, Jamni Jokomiata, then Sosugeda, Sosuke or Kare Jubinada, Jeza di Yama Dipa Nasolki, Dipa Mangos of Jiminus and Gavachi, Samnochi Tang, that didn't Yakem Conjus Mudulia Dipati Shaggy, Sambida, in top of the Shaggy, some shoot up was here. Mom Banazao in a chime, Sambe Samlo shoot our gear. That the Dibasha Donalia thinking you 2 years and begida, so Sugeta, Com Javana, Chachu Sam combine, Nijo combine, don't buy you to be share of combine that you got it, Timibeda, Jake Sosuke, many Tabata, Lamake, so the Karidumbaina, and Aji Chow Puyala Sopata, the Nigi and the Chimande Puyala Sopata, Dusinaka Karasabina, Dusavina, Samlo Dus Dang. That's so you learn to get your courage, Jebena, that Dipashawa Chagore. Jazan Dipashawa di Shawa or Dusine, man the Dipasha who could hedge it.
The guidance here then is both to accumulate virtue, as just been mentioned, through ethics, generosity, patience, love, compassion, and so forth, but also to purify. What purification means is also the same as accumulation, in that they both are about ensuring our mind is turned towards virtue, and thereby away from non-virtue. So to look specifically then at the process of purification, here the guidance is to rely on the 4 opponent powers. But what these 4 opponent powers really come down to are a skillful technique by which we change our way of thinking. And in order to change one's way of thinking, one should engage in purification practice again and again, because the process of changing one's way of thinking, in particular, in a sincere manner, takes repeated effort. So the 4 opponent powers can be practiced in any sequence, but just to give as an illustration then, one first can generate regret. So to generate regret, it's ideal if one recalls things that one has explicitly done. And one can generate regret for physical actions done or speech made or ways of thinking. So it's particularly helpful if one can recall specific things one has done, because the regret is likely to be much stronger. And to amplify the the regret, or to make the regret more genuine, here one also recalls the suffering consequences that will follow from such non-virtue, unless it is now purified. So here, one generates regret. Then, one can then, if one chooses, go to the second opponent power, or a second opponent power, because the order is not set, and that is of reliance. So this has two components again, one being of protecting refuge, where one can recall or call to mind that non-virtuous behavior was contrary to the guidance of the Buddhas, contrary to the example of the Sangha. And thereby, one confesses to the three jewels. And one can also generate bodhicitta here with the commitment to that, with the recognition that such non-virtuous behavior is contrary to the commitments of the bodhisattvas. And then one can go to another opponent power, that of the power of the promise, where one commits to not engaging in such behavior again. This then, ideally too, as with all of the opponent powers, should be done with sincerity, where one makes a commitment to close the door on that way of thinking or speaking or acting. And then finally, one can engage in an antidotal power. And it can be anything that one is inclined to, anything virtuous that one is inclined to. So some may choose to offer mandalas, some may choose to recite mantras such as Om Mani Padme Hum or another mantra. Others may engage in supplications to the Lama or to the Buddha, recitations of various prayers. And others may feel drawn to engage in a particular virtuous meditation such as love, compassion, or any other. So these are the four opponent powers, those of regret, reliance, the promise, and the antidote. And all four of them individually serve to purify as they are virtuous, but together they are extremely powerful. And therefore, this is a very skillful practice to engage in regularly.
Delia dinigi imbotu shukone divashayandu dinigi samtadu kalda di samtadu watang suni pene shugaya jigi lanyo pene ni senda oda diri ajike ngamane tipo mongo sasha de tayo de sa tipo diga shagi sembeta dinigi nodu chungyo diga diringi konjo de shagi sembe samtaje nganzo ge shugaya ni ya jigi ja puya da dinigi 최고피는 집보로 표현에 디버샤에게 돈달라 표현 차고로와 지자다 마음반에 되는 디버자위 주의지매 지자는 무드시 되는게 야는 기쇼트지 냠는 제제 개와치마 먼저고 관체바자 남냠네 그래서 된제바 톱도바 지긴 선배 삼다시 되는게 먼저 표현 당한 쇼표야 지금 되는게 삼다는 교식된 삼다베다 아주기 어디 님보듯이 디버샤바 차고를 개와치마 먼저 주비게 계세서 그래서 그 배대와 주기 개와티야 사바 니가 념도 두고 그러다
you can choose to engage in purification practice when you get up in the morning, and it can be a very skillful way to start the day. So one gets up and one settles down to do your practice, and you start by recalling non-virtue that you have done, in particular, the kind of non-virtue that you have a propensity to, a habituation towards. And you recall that generating regret, and recall to mind the suffering results that will follow from ongoing non-virtue. And with that then, you make the promise, so the second opponent power, of I won't engage in this again. And in particular here, if you're doing this in the morning, you can think of your activities that lie ahead in the day. And especially again, if this is a non-virtue that you're quite habituated to, you can think to yourself, in certain, today I may well encounter at this time or in that situation, the conditions where I may act in this habitual way. I'll be on guard. I won't do it. And in this way, your power of the promise carries extra strength. And then you can then engage in the power of reliance, in calling to mind the Buddhas and going for refuge and generating bodhicitta. Then the final power is that of the antidote. Then you can lay out your offerings, sit down, and engage in the 7 limb practice, for example, which starts with prostrations, offerings, and so forth, and concludes with offering a mandala. So in this way, what is very common in our tradition as a morning practice, one can do within or through the lens of being a purification practice. But purification practices are also practices of accumulation, because one purifies through accumulating virtue, because there's a virtue that is contrary to the non-virtue, and that's how one purifies. So this then is a skillful way to do one's morning practice in a way that is also a purification practice.
And the moment and the niggy jiggy dance on what top chair and then the chain Lama Yawo chair lamit in the church Yamlin net Yawo chair go over our shows and big Molam chair or the Manzuki showed that when you go on to you so that then you lead into your duty just a shagore just and this one some die telling you used to be a new big Java said in Jimia somebody didn't buy Yamachi nor shall dream no telling the Shaggy special some that didn't pang the some Jimmy, some big some losing this some of the Medina Yando some died up and Jiggy Durba in that puzzle job in there, no Yagaruchin that some died, losing a new bitch. I was at the Jimmy, some be some of Dustin, Jaddy, do some of the Yana done it, soon as some bars, Garson wasn't, Shannon never jaded, soon go something. In this was again. And those in the Jimba, the children of Central Sober, Yamnaji, Chesada, Devi Gucci said, the DQGS in Deva, Mudinjo to you to the Yamnaji said, sometimes did this something over this sometime in the Devi good, not to go.
To ensure that we continue to attain ongoing excellent rebirths such as we have in this life and not fall into the lower realms. The principal cause is that of ethics. So one needs to ethically restrain, at the very least, one's body from not engaging in non-virtue, as well as one's speech from not engaging in non-virtue, and ideally one's mind as well, to whatever extent one can, not to be afflicted. So this is the practice of ethics, and it is the primary cause that leads to, or really is the sole cause that leads to excellent rebirths, rebirths such as we've achieved now. So it is indispensable that we take care of our mind at all times, not just in formal practice, but at all times. Take care of our mind, and thereby we can take care of our physical behavior and our speech as well. But whilst ethical restraint is the sole cause that leads to an excellent rebirth, for that rebirth to be a fully qualified, precious human rebirth, it needs to be enhanced by other favorable circumstances. So in order that one has at least sufficient, if not an abundance of material conditions, material comfort, one needs to engage in the practice of generosity, where one develops a sincere wish to give of oneself. One also needs to engage in the practice of patience so as to create the causes for one's sense faculties to be complete, but also to have harmonious relationships with others, to easily get on with others. And to ensure that one has a propensity towards virtue, to have a personality that is inclined towards virtue, one needs to cultivate the cause of joyous perseverance. And then the final cause is that of prayer, where one should make prayers in each future life, to continue to meet the Mahayana Dharma, to meet and recognize one's Lama as such, and come under the care of one's Lama. So this is then the final cause. So these are the causes that are required for ongoing precious human rebirths: ethics, generosity, patience, choice, perseverance, and prayer. And these causes are accumulated in dependence on our way of thinking. So, for example, patience is a mind of being patient. Generosity is a mind of generosity. So for these causes to arise in one in a way that is deep and not merely superficial, one needs to cultivate these causes repeatedly over a sustained period, both in formal settings, such as now, when we're all thinking about it, as well as during our day, as we go about our various activities. And in this way, we create the causes for ongoing excellent rebirths.
두시네다 녜주도 비추름 송야다 디니게 삼로디 바두 제야네 양도 야네 타면은 엔기디나 삼로디 파 코르딩에 차고로 디네 사다 야네 디바샬레 니베 삼바세디 마야에게 타녀니 지칭을 줘야다 디네 사다 마야디 두 차야데 가슴지로 소소나 어데 제 당아 겨와지 제 야타지 두니 나서 기와지만 나서도 기마 기와지만 덴로데 기투사레 샘베게 디니게 소소란 덴소일에 아주 용고로 받아 두시는 냠렌지 소소람 당게 땡도 주시도 고섬 소소기 삼로다까지 누가 슈체로베네 근데 그 개와 망아사고래 디바드 마샤로고래 제사다 개와데 디바세디 차랑이다 버리 이 차와가 슈체르나 장와도 용용주고라 장와도 슈체르나 차와도 슈총주고라 제사 개와 가제 망아사도네 냐마 디바사샤베네 누바메 차르고래 제사 냐마 안소 얘기 레르브지 사여베네 다정 아주 줄에 뇽몽바디기 파메바 쇠샤베네 사번 주변에 긴메네 뇽몽바디메네 안소 기투야요 말에 기투고 말세 베네 안소 사번로 주변에 조즈가라 샤셔네 될 긴추다 지금 사로면은 유제 가요 말고 사번 주요때 어디 마사나를 비에 출루샤베네 긴고로 와 긴테요 어디 나시리 아주 줄에 냐마 디버사셰비 디버 나솔게 냐와 나메세야 되지게 니다다 나와 냐와 나메다 두루게 레가지 레지 사본 주여베이네야 다들 하는 중에 뇽몽바게 맞추바지 뇽몽바도 바까네 세대기 뇽몽바도 바까샤바 메바 쇠베네 세베네 니 공나솔에 기토야요 말이지 니가와 기로스 덴돌을 바기야레세 지자 도시는 하는 중에 디버봉 개어줍세 도시는 삼무다야 돼 다가지 삼무다죠 대시 나 도시네
Key point I want to emphasize here is that the meaning of Buddhist practice and the focus of what you as Buddhists should be doing is focusing on your way of thinking, on transforming your way of thinking. So when you think of, for example, accumulation and purification, recognize that this refers to a way of thinking. So too, the accumulation of merit or the avoidance of non-virtue, it really comes down to a way of thinking. Because whilst on the one hand, certainly we shouldn't physically engage in non-virtue, and ideally we should physically engage in ways of helping, so too with our speech. What we are really trying to get to is to change our way of thinking. What a person who is spiritually developing, what they will recognize within themselves is they are developing, for example, an aversion to harming others. And with this, to the extent this aversion to harming others arises, they will not speak badly towards others, certainly will not act in a way physically that brings harm to others. And together with this, developing a predisposition to being of benefit to others. So to the extent that is arising, this person will readily reach out to help others through their speech, through their way of acting. So it's this transformation of a way of thinking. This is the meaning of Buddhist practice. So on our continuum, we have a wide collection of karmic imprints, virtuous and non-virtuous, some very powerful, some weak. And when a time of death comes, whichever imprint is most powerful will determine our next rebirth. Moreover, our various experiences in each rebirth, in this life too, comes about in dependence on the karma we've created. The way we create karma, virtuous and non-virtuous, is through our way of thinking. So if our way of thinking is virtuous, we will accumulate extensive virtue. If our way of thinking is harmful, we are going to accumulate non-virtuous karma. Hence the need to transform one's way of thinking. One may physically refrain from harmful action and harmful speech, and this is excellent and required. But if one's mind is non-virtuous, still one accumulates non-virtue, although it's not as strong. And moreover, though, what causes our mind to be non-virtuous and thereby our behavior is the afflictions. Hence the need, and this has been what's so emphasized in the Wednesday teachings, the need to weaken, to subdue the afflictions and eventually eradicate them. Because it's through the weakening and eventual eradication of the afflictions that we bring about an end to the accumulation of non-virtue. But also, a further role the afflictions can play is they can lead to the ripening of non-virtuous karma. So if we weaken and eventually eradicate the afflictions, the non-virtuous karmic imprints that will still remain on our continuum cannot ripen. So therefore, the eventual goal is not to purify all negative karma, it's to eradicate the afflictions. Or to express that differently, the eventual goal or objective of purification is to remove our propensity to the afflictions, to completely eradicate that, so that afflictions never arise. And then, whatever non-virtuous karmic imprints remain on our continuum, no matter how strong, really doesn't matter. It cannot ripen. So this is why you should be very clear that the meaning of Buddhist practice is transforming our way of thinking. The meaning of accumulating merit, of purifying non-virtue, means transforming our way of thinking, developing this deep aversion to harming, developing this propensity to being of benefit.
차상 삼로 단지 두스제는 되시에 가서 삼로 단에는 삼로디 되네다 겨치마 지게 먼저 고방주야 근데 지게 돼서 강바야고 차야 근데 지게 야고 차상 라디 두스네 삼로 되네 삼로 단지네 제베 냠는 제베네 디기 유사용을 유사는 두고로 봐 제가 두스는 담지 가서 삼바라 라리고로 제가 지금 지게 담제 삼바다라 라리어서세 송고로 와 제가 삼바 제가 사달 삼바사나 서다라면서 삼방하나 서다라면 탐지 삼바다 나래도 소시에 되되되 제가 삼바 사보 군노 야고 제베네 라자와 가르치나 야고 용물이에서 삼바 군노 안바 시제네 디왕의 제베네 야 가르나 두와 중물이 진짜도 또 삼로들 라리고라지 제가 두시는 삼다와는 언능한 주기 두시는 삼다와는 개와치 몽원도 고봉 토야 디니된 개발진 차야 디니게 차야 차상 지가 주기 두고 제가 삼로다
Wherever we are reborn and however we experience that particular rebirth, all comes about in dependence on our way of thinking. So this is a statement about our future rebirth, but it's also a statement about this current rebirth, how we experience this rebirth. Our experience, our life is dependent on our way of thinking. Therefore, by transforming our way of thinking, we transform this life as well as lives to come. Lama Tsongkhapa states very clearly that everything depends on our mind. And then he goes on to say, this isn't from the text, again, I was quoting from something else. he then goes on to say that from a wholesome motivation, happiness comes. From an unwholesome motivation, suffering follows. So everything depends on the mind.
제사다 개와 치마다 달바다 템지게 삼라디는 두고 월세데 다중원이 수를 작업을 봐 배는 한 쪽이 지딘 배라가 가르치면은 삼도단의 제워 삼당보 삼도단 삼미된 두고 그러마도 먼저 지단 롭종을 찍을 때 삼로 열게 다야고 롭종 라고만 이나 롭종 찍고 롭지고 이나 삼로단한테 라고 봐다 삼로단하라고 그러봐 라고 봐다 가지 누스전에 대시에 대내시 저거서 삼나로 코고 배는 아주 강보 서베네 당보 삼나로 코고도 강보대 맞은이는 삼로 나라 강보 찾아서 접대 찾아서 줍살이다. 강보 찾아 강보 삼로 나라 찾아서 저살에 맞 두스 나와데 강보 찾아 샤르도 거래. 때 된지디 샤고래. 제사 디 삼로 나라 당보 삼로 나라 삼로 당 강보 된지 삼로 단에 삼로 나라 봐서 줍살네 되네 강보도 söö도 삼로 나라 요바 나신예마 삼로 나 샤르도 바 나신원이라지 주고 봐. 삼로나래 강보소에 간에서 차상 삼로나라 샤지직 섭다직 샤르메나 쇠래 깔려버려 쇠투 말에 요 말에 제사 디네자 먼저 다 강보 수긴 집에 삼단도 다 강보가 간에서 디네스요 고 기웅 디네시지 직토 디네 요바 수긴 두 삼로나 차상 삼로 코라차 삼로나래 강보도 주도야다 하봉원이 주요 삼로나 주요래 조선 다디 강보디 소야리아 차진 가르가르 요고서 삼다 어디고 아 삼나는 바지세 삼나 차상 되지 살네 되는 신의 두용 걸 삼로네 되면은 야메네 제상 아주기 체디기 강바당 자라로 카르치네 당보 삼나는 삼땅제 삼나나직 두두 되는 신의 뭐네 되기도 어디나신 깨워치마 원디오 고바셔야 돼. 내가 아주 삼나도시 삼다도시 삼다에도 아껴왔지만 원디오 고바 된지 된 토고도 선배 디된 야보시 된델이야 튠겐 강아 매바 안지게 냠내지야랑 기보시알이야 판도지도 된 개발진 토고도 선배 된지 토고도 선배 삼로지 파고 다디 디토베 도나라 어다디 저속이 예지도 수림소야 진배 냠내지야 수배 냠내지 라렌다이디로와 지산대지 강보죠. 강보디는 수요 선배서 강보 찾아 줍삼은 줍자제. 강보디 수해를 규지 가르가르 고선 다지 자고도 지지고도 니고 차산지지 되게 강보 주고 삐찌삐찌게 하셔고 그러더니.
As Lama Tsongkhapa said there, everything depends on our mind, so that we have attained this excellent rebirth has come about independence on our own way of thinking. And whether our next rebirth is in the high realms or low realms depends on our way of thinking. And this isn't the truth of this statement from Lama Tsongkhapa isn't just about where one is reborn, it's also about how one experiences each rebirth. So let's take this, our own human experience. Everything that is manufactured, that is created, has come about independence on a way of thinking. Vast number of causes are required, and these required mental engagement, requires thought. So for each of you, you have a wide number of skills and talents and abilities. These all required your mental engagement to be able to learn these skills, develop these talents. And to take something very visible and easy to understand. So if someone has a desire to build a property, build a home, the only way that will come about is if it starts with them having the wish to do so, with having that thought. Then that thought, if it's merely left at that, nothing more than the thought will arise. But if the home or the home is to be constructed, that thought needs to be developed. A clear plan needs to be visualized. This too is about developing the mind further. And this plan needs to be visualized, independence on knowledge and information to see what is possible, thinking about how it can be brought into reality, what is required, this and that, and who to contract and who is better, and so forth. All the detail to make this plan a reality. And then it can be acted upon. So at every stage here, is mental engagement. And this is for building our home. It's for everything around us, a variety of inequalities too. And so too about our ongoing spiritual development. In order to have that determination to accumulate the causes, whether it's for enlightenment or individual liberation or for rebirth, further excellent rebirth, this requires us to develop a wish to do so. And in particular, if our wish is for a great goal, it can't just be a mere aspiration. How wonderful it would be if all beings were happy. One really needs to make this happen. One needs to bring about a deep, deep transformation. And this requires reflection in the way that is presented repeatedly over a sustained period. And then it will be brought into reality.
when somebody then took over in the Sebo Hago to go, Pena Jugi, Sojilia, Jigan, the Gishi Shawine, Gishi and the Nabo, but the machine and some non so some Nalia, Sasan did shaking some on a bunch to Sarvata. So some knowledge as I said, the modern jelly was Siguro. Just Tambo some knowledge who call when you share the Kalahawachagore. Says Tambo, Penny, machine and some on the Trusade. Ma Jagajina Harwa. Ma Tunja Bijimadan, someone on the march as I get suggested the beach dance there. Other digi didn't get such a did I do with the mails together. To someone on a Shasan Bangri, Bang DJ, Denishine, or could be La Lumostego. Just someone on a Bangri chase the Yakumen. Mine, I was to marry this John Amadama. I didn't actually. She's done to Lia Carson to Chinazu some dada. Nanzulia, Carriage, and Yan, some Nalia. Some knowledge has on cohort, some non called the some digi Jesu dance into Zigor, Chazan. Just a deed, just a Tamja Sambata Rally, just a to do it, and the museum to Shigomara, Shimju Majibaza Hagoma, the Shimju Jevena, then hungry that not the Sunny Jimnity, Yamni sympathy, that some non Tawore said. Just a do Chinana Shimcheven, and the Lega Karacheven and Yelia, some of you court. Some of the Jesu Raji Hala Jixu Gorba, Jingan to Lega Chigora, Jeza, some of Mahoban, Lega Jitu Jeza, Deji, Dajing on the Dundro, Lension Kuba, Jeza Dundro Dinia, some call to Gomarwa. Call Mother with a Kikanga said the Tablam di beach down to Gomara. Milia Nil in the summer down to with the Jitu Gorba. Or these are Jeza, some down Horech, the Kipasha said, give out to Kiva Chima. When you go on to yet, now Tarba Tamji go to Chazan, some of the dance to Burmado, you had down to a Merwada. Says I Benjo, some Madana, Benjo Champuine, Tarba Tamji Kimbe, when you go out to Yamare, and then also got to Yamare. Ga, which me Joe, and to get sad to Yada, Chick Dessa, the Kangai, Chick Suji Robokaya making Susi Chiburicine, so some not on a beach down and the dinner chevine. Then Kiwachima, when you go out to go Tarba Tamjiki Bogo, Drew to water, National Dry there, Chazanga to work. Just some of the tango. Is the day is that I had to get Sanyu Gemne Digim, and Tiki to you that to us at all, now some little to go race, Chetan Samno de la Tanta Tiki do so tango said, so all of Johnny did you work.
Keep this in mind as you go through your day, as you observe society, recognizing how everything follows from mental engagement. Whether you are seeing people acting in the world or you're seeing the fruitions or the results of their endeavors. So when you see someone giving a speech, then you know that person would have had given some thought to what they had to say. Otherwise, they're probably not going to make much of a speech. Or those engaging in warfare. This needs to have been well planned out. Others is not going to go very well, and devastating consequences for themselves will follow. So every physical and verbal interaction follows from our way of thinking, from one's mind. So I'm saying this to you, I'm emphasizing this point now many times, so that in your own practice, you ensure your mental engagement is excellent. You don't just engage in mere recitations, but you engage mentally with the practice. So too with these meditations here, that you don't merely go through the outlines of the meditation, but you generate these actual minds within yourself. You generate this emotional response so that you can, through habituation, develop a change in your way of thinking. And then specifically in the context of this topic, I encourage you to, when you're seeing all that's achieved in our world, ask yourself, how can beings in the lower realms possibly achieve anything like this? They lack the intelligence to do so, and their suffering is too intense. They can't solve their problems. They cannot think of solutions because their pain is too intense and they lack intelligence. Whereas for us as human beings with this remarkable human intelligence, just look at the potential comfort and ease in our world. And we recognize just what human beings have achieved. Then we can take that as a guide to what we ourselves can achieve with our own minds in terms of our spiritual development. That we really can, in what remains of this life, still we can bring about a radical change and a lasting change to our way of thinking. But this requires us to make a concerted effort with transforming our mind, letting go of all that really has no value and focusing on the one thing that does. Then thank you. Then we'll conclude there for tonight. Thank you.